For our presentation, we will be going over terms of service agreements and user privacy with a focus on responsibility and ethics. Our group consists of Reg Gonzalez, Daniel Unrales, Kim Lay, and Noor Varani.
For a formal definition, the terms of service are a legal agreement between a user and provider for a service. You may have also heard this labeled as terms of use, terms and conditions, or a disclaimer. However, TOS is different from a EULA, or End User License Agreement. EULAs outline legal agreements for software, which is usually purchased, while terms of service are specifically for services. Now, TOS are intended to protect the provider from a user's actions. Should the user misbehave or perform unsavory actions on or through the service, TOS allows the provider to avoid unintended consequences and take corrective action. If a user abuses the service or breaks outlined rules, the provider can lay out consequences to such violations, such as termination of that user's account. Furthermore, the provider can relinquish liability and legal repercussions of that user's actions and outcomes. TOS also allows a provider to claim and defend ownership of all non-user generated content in the service, should any copyright or intellectual property issues arise. One final example of TOS is governing law, where the provider can acknowledge and adopt the law of a higher governing body, such as New York state law, if the service operates within that domain. However, TOS itself can be abused by the provider. We've all been there. We get this super long wall of text talking about law or something like that, blah, 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 blah. Scroll through if you need to, click accept, you're done. I can personally say I've never read a TOS in its entirety before, and I'm willing to bet the majority of the population hasn't either. And besides, the TOS is non-negotiable. I don't get a say in it, why should I care? And if I don't agree, I don't get to use the service. But it's not like the provider would actually ever use it against me, right? Unfortunately, this attitude most of us have could allow a company to sneak in hidden details or nuances into their TOS, leaving the users vulnerable and possibly exploited. Which leads us to the big question. What ethical responsibility do we have as providers when outlining terms of service?
We decided to use the ACM Code of Ethics as a foundation to start our analysis of the terms of service we're examining. The code is used for computing professionals around the world, and its goal is to set fundamental ethical principles that should be upheld throughout the technological space. The two sections that we chose to focus on are sections 1.6, Respect Privacy, and 1.7, Honor Confidentiality. Section 1.6 is about respecting an individual's privacy. As technology continues to evolve, the ability to monitor, exchange, and collect personal information becomes easier. These actions are also able to occur without the knowledge of those it is affecting. Therefore, it's important for computing professionals to not only define what various forms of privacy are, but to understand users' rights and the responsibilities we have as members of the space in order to make sure the personal information is safe and secure. One of these responsibilities includes using personal information only for legitimate means without violating the rights of others. This includes not being able to re-identify data, ensure accuracy on that data, protect it from unauthorized access, etc. Companies should also have transparent policies so that the users know what their data is being used for. And this goes without saying, but it's also important that you collect only the necessary personal information needed. Section 1.7 is honoring confidentiality. Many computing professionals are entrusted with confidential information, including client data, trade secrets, non-public business strategies, etc. Because we are entrusted with so much confidential data, it's essential that we protect it. However, there is a bit of a caveat. In cases where information violates law, organizational regulations, or the code itself, you should use your own judgment as to whether or not you believe that information should still be confidential. In these cases, you need to contact the appropriate authorities, and the information should only be disclosed to them.
As we stated earlier, terms of service agreements are usually long, convoluted, and vague. They are also non-negotiable and give users no choice if they want to use the service. As they are so vague and long, there may be clauses that users are not aware of and are not entirely comfortable with. For example, many social media terms of service agreements give the vendor free use of things posted by users online. This includes usernames, profile pictures, and actions such as likes, all of which can be sold to third-party companies. This violates ACM Ethics Code Section 1.6 as it is the collection of unnecessary personal information and spreading of the data without making it anonymous. Another example is cloud service terms of service agreements that state that they can access your data if they have quote-unquote reasonable cause. The terms of service agreement does not usually define reasonable, which leaves room for possible ethics code breaches if data that is not violating laws or organizational regulations is accessed. Now we'll take a look at a specific terms of service agreement, which is the Amazon Web Services terms of agreement, and whether or not it complies with the discussed ACM clauses.
A couple of clauses that we saw were clause 59.2 and 75.3. In fact, these clauses may even apply to you. In clause 59.2, it says that AWS can use and store your data that has been processed through their Alexa for Business service. In clause 75.3, it says the same thing but for their Amazon fraud detection service. To bluntly put it, AWS has free reign over your data, and when we're talking about AWS, we can just assume all of their services. This means that all the things that you say to Alexa, which is information that is important to you and does define you, is being spread throughout AWS. It's being used by AWS. This also applies to their Amazon fraud detection service, where it becomes way more serious since we are dealing with information that is important enough to involve fraud. In our presentation, we did go over the ACM Code of Ethics and specifically sections 1.6, Respect of Privacy, and 1.7, Honor of Confidentiality. And after looking at these terms and after looking at these clauses, we can see that these clauses are kind of vague when it comes to the ACM Code of Ethics. For instance, the Code of Ethics say that they want clear policies, and in the AWS TOS, we can see that while yes, they did say that they are using your information with AWS, they really don't specify like what AWS is using it for, what AWS is using it with, and the only way we can really know is if they're explicit with us, which they aren't. To summarize, terms of services, or TOS, are intended to be used to protect services from their users. However, TOS can be used by companies in order to briefly and vaguely go over the fact that they are using your data other than what is intended to be used for. As you saw when we went over the AWS TOS, terms of services can be used to blur over what a service views user privacy and confidentiality to be. The catchphrase for our presentation is your content.